Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. With the release of the new trailer for The Mandalorian that will be coming to TV on November 12th, I thought it was as good of a time as any to take a deeper look at Mandalorian culture. You see, the Mandalorians were a diverse group of people. In the beginning, they weren't defined by their species, but more by their shared culture, language, and creed. Or at least that's what Legends says. Current Disney canon on Mandalorian culture is a bit light, but they do borrow some of the better elements from the Legends version of Mandalorian culture, and I think we're going to see this trend as The Mandalorian is released and goes deeper into Mandalorian culture. This Mandalorian code of how to live was the most important identifier of who was a Mandalorian. It didn't actually matter where you were from or even how strong of a warrior you were. The most important thing about being Mandalorian was living by the code. The Mandalorian code evolved slowly throughout the centuries, and it evolved to become almost a protective set of laws that helped the Mandalorians protect themselves from their very self-destructive behavior. You see, the Mandalorians had a very warrior-like mentality. This is perhaps whenever in history the Mandalorians were unified by selecting a Mandalore or leader, they ended up destroying massive parts of the galaxy before the Republic unites and drives them back. For a full account of Mandalorian history and their rise and fall, and then rise and then fall, check out our Evolution of Mandalorians video. So the Mandalorians have a pretty turbulent history, which eventually resulted in a large Mandalorian diaspora living all across the galaxy. As a result of their warlike culture, the Mandalorians even saw their home planet turn into a wasteland where the living could only survive in domed cities. In Legends, it's because of a Jedi-led Republic fleet. It's just another reason why the Mandalorians and Jedi really don't get along. The Mandalorian TV show takes place during the post-Imperial era. The Mandalorians had split into many different factions during the Galactic Civil War. Some joined the Empire side, while others joined the Rebellion, but far more Mandalorians remained neutral and had been roaming the galaxy working mainly as hired guns. Generally, communities that leave their home nation or homeland will cling on closer to their original culture because it gives them a sense of identity in a new, strange place. That's kind of what's so cool about an international city like New York. You have so many different people from different countries living here, and while they were in their homelands, they might have taken their culture for granted. Now that they're living as immigrants in a strange new country, they'll try to reconnect with those cultures and eventually even share it with a wider community. The Mandalorians are no different. As they became a more nomadic species, their people also became easier to identify because of their shared culture and appearance. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at the codes and rules that guide the Mandalorians. Because if we have a better understanding of Mandalorian culture, we'll also have a better understanding of the Mandalorian. At the center of the Mandalorian Code of Honor were three sets of rules: the Resol'nar, the Canons of Honor, and also the Super Commando Codex. While these three sets of rules were pretty derivative of one another and sometimes redundant, they did clearly stand out in why they were created and what their purposes were. The Canons of Honor came first and was originally adopted from the Twang, an alien species that fought humanity on the ancient world of Norton, which today is known as Coruscant. These predator-like aliens were defeated by humanity's superior numbers and eventually left Coruscant to establish a new planet and a new culture. The Twang would make up the first Mandalorian wars, but soon they started accepting aliens from other species as part of their ranks as long as they followed their way of living. The Canons of Honor were separated into four easy-to-remember sentences. Strength is life, for the strong have the right to rule. Honor is life, for with no honor one might as well be dead. Loyalty is life, for without one's clan one has no purpose. Death is life, one should die as they have lived. As a warrior society, physical strength is one of the most important traits in Mandalorian culture. The Mandalorians believe that a good leader must also be the strongest leader, because a good leader will not ask his men to do something unless he can do it himself. This would become one of the central tenets of Mandalorian culture. In order to become the Mandalore, one must first defeat the former Mandalore in combat. This was great for smaller groups of Mandalorians that were maybe working as bounty hunters. But choosing the leader of an entire group of people based on physical strength is not a great idea, especially because physical ability has never been an accurate predictor for intelligence. Also, the Mandalorian idea that only the strongest can rule was upended several times by Force users who definitely had an unfair advantage in single combat. This is how Maul became the Mandalore, and Revan, at least for a short time, technically could have also been considered the Mandalore. The new Mandalorians faction that would try to modernize Mandalore later on would see this infatuation with strength as a major hurdle to overcome. Now, honor was another very important part of Mandalorian culture. This created a set of laws of combat for the Mandalorians. Although victory brought honor to an individual, it still mattered how they got that victory. For instance, stabbing someone in the back is not an honorable victory. And so it's much more honorable to die in an epic defeat than by winning a battle in a very dishonorable way. Honor made sure that Mandalorian clans didn't dissolve into chaos. Honor also helped reinforce the first tenets of strength. Without honor, you could just technically assassinate the Mandalore, and this could potentially cause weaker individuals to rise in power. This was a huge problem with the Sith Order and led to Darth Bane adopting the Rule of Two. Loyalty was the next tenet, and it was equally as important as honor when it came to preserving the rest of the code. The Mandalorian was beholden to his or her clan, and all the Mandalorian clans followed the Mandalore. This is what made the Mandalorians such a dangerous people. Whenever a Mandalore called for a great crusade, almost every house answered that call. The Mandalorians would always wage total war. A high percentage of their population were fighters, and even a higher percentage of their population were involved in some kind of support industry that helped the Mandalorians fight. So despite their lower population numbers, the Mandalorians were still able to field huge armies of well-equipped fighters. Death was the last tenet, and it was one of the most important factors that helped reinforce all the other tenets. Dying a good death is important in Mandalorian culture, especially if it's one that serves one of the other tenets. This is important in a militarized warrior society where death is common and unfortunately a lot of times pointless. Having death as a central tenet allows the Mandalorians to tie some higher purpose to dying for a cause. Messaging like this is powerful and can make the difference when someone considers dying for a cause. But more importantly, this tenet reinforces the idea that a Mandalorian should die before they go against their code. The Death Watch were a fundamentalist faction of the Mandalorians that followed the canons of honor. As you can tell, the canons of honor are a bit too limited and simple to really keep the more murderous intentions of the Death Watch in check. And so the next step in Mandalorian culture was the Resol'nar, or the 6 actions. This is a more updated version of the Mandalorian canons of honor and focused more specifically on keeping the Mandalorian diaspora united and ensuring the survival of the Mandalorian way of life. The 6 acts were wearing armor, speaking the language, defending yourself and your family, raising your children as Mandalorians, contributing to the clan's welfare, and when called upon by the Mandalore, rallying to his cause. Now the last 2 tenets focus on supporting the Mandalore and your clan. But the first 4 are all about creating a cultural unity. Speaking Mandoa and also wearing armor becomes a central part of being Mandalorian. These are visual and linguistic identifiers that will make Mandalorians unique, especially when they're living away from Mandalore. The Resol'nar also focuses more on self-defense and more importantly, defense of your family. The idea here is to encourage Mandalorians to be more involved in creating a stable home to create more young Mandalorians and teach them your culture. The last and most important part of the Mandalorian Code was the Super Commando Codex. This was created by the Mandalorian soldier Jaster Mirel, father of Jango Fett and the true Mandalorians and Mandalorian protectors. Jaster realized that the Mandalorian canons of honor and Resol'nar didn't quite do enough to address ethics, especially in combat. This had always been a problematic part of Mandalorian culture. Strength and might was right no matter what. Morality and ethics were usually less important. This is why the Mandalorians as a people have committed more than their share of atrocities, genocides, and other war crimes. This lack of morality and ethics allowed the Mandalorians to serve easily as hired guns and bounty hunters. It was also the mentality of a group just trying to survive. Mirel wanted to reform the Mandalorians into something else and get rid of this negative view of the Mandalorians. The Super Commando Codex forbid Mandalorians from becoming raiders and brigands, and required them to only conduct themselves as soldiers or honorable mercenaries. The Codex was not accepted by all Mandalorians because some saw it as taking sides. Using the Super Commando Codex, one could argue that certain factions were morally wrong if the job included killing innocent civilians, for instance. As mercenaries and boundaries, Mandalorians tried to not involve ethics in their jobs because it usually would limit who their employers were during a war. The Death Watch in particular found the Super Commando Codex offensive and a direct attack on their way of living, which oftentimes involved a lot of behavior that most people would consider immoral. So we're not really sure what the Mandalorian is going to be like, We're not really sure what code he's going to be following. Is he going to be following the original Mandalorian code or something that's a little more new, like the Super Commando Codex? I think having Jon Favreau as the producer for the Mandalorian will give us some opportunities to see a more complicated character. You know, he was the one who created Tony Stark, who isn't really the most righteous hero, and I think we're kind of ready for that in Star Wars. We want to see a more conflicted hero, or maybe even an anti-hero, but who knows if Disney's ready for that. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you're hoping to see in the new Mandalorian. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss on the rest of our awesome content. Also, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.